Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT Top 10 video. Today Aaron will be diving into the top 10 items to look for in patch 10.9. We'll be exploring the new items popping up in the meta as well as already valuable items in the previous meta. As always, this is not listed in order of strength as each item is strong depending on the right circumstances. With that said, let's get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright folks, let's get back to the video, and to kick it off, we're going to start off with Static Shiv as the number 10 pick. Static Shiv has been doing quite well as an early game damage item that transitions smoothly into the late game for a few compositions. In 10.9, it's still doing that job and is a worthwhile consideration to make early on in the game. Due to the fact that it does AoE damage and synergizes with fast attacking champions, it's great for early Blade Masters or Blasters. Later on, it's useful on champions like Kale as she attacks fast and generally has Chrono plus Blade Master backing her, or you can give it to an Echo in Cybernetics as the effect procs during his ultimate. Early game, there are a few champions you can give this item to, such as Xayah, Lucian, or Fiora. From there, you can add in Blade Master, Cybernetics, or Blasters depending on what you find and which of the three champions you're playing. Outside of that, it's just a solid damage item. Keep in mind that there may be better options from the components that Shiv is made of, so make sure that you consider that before making it. Next up, for the number 9 item on the list, we have ZZ Rot Portal. ZZ Rot fell in and out of favor throughout set 3 and returned to glory in 10.8 as a valuable frontline item. While there are more options now on the frontline in 10.9, it's still a great item to make to give your frontline a little bit more health. ZZ Rot is also still one of the stronger early game items, as it's difficult for most early game compositions and champions to burn through the high health of the construct after the item holder dies. This basically gives you an extra champion's worth of health for the enemy to burn through, which is often enough for you to win the round and get on a win streak. As mentioned, it does best on frontline champions, but make sure it's on a champion that may die quickly and not something like Leona that will take a while to go down. Otherwise, what may happen is the harder to kill champion stays alive till the end and there's no more damage dealers to tank for, so you're left with a construct which is just in its current form not doing enough damage. Overall, the item is fantastic in the early game and useful later on if you're ever feeling like you need a little bit of extra frontline. Moving along, let's talk about two items coming in at number 8 on the list together: Red Buff and Morellonomicon. Red Buff and Morellonomicon are combined as they both serve a similar role in the game. They have good damage early on and later are used for both damage and the healing debuff they provide. Currently, Red Buff is slightly more popular as a general item to make, whereas Morellonomicon is more situational, but it all depends on what composition you're running. Red Buff is fantastic for physical damage carries that have any form of splash, which primarily means blasters. Early game, when given to Lucian, it can often be enough to propel you into a win streak when you pair Lucian with Cybernetics and one other blaster. It's a core item for Lucian later on in Cybernetics, or you can play it in Brawler Blaster on any of Jinx, Lucian, or Misfortune. Morellonomicon, on the opposite side of the spectrum, does best on champions with AoE abilities. Early game Twisted Fate or Kai'Sa will do well with this item. Later on in the game, it's considered a core item on Kai'Sa and does well on other champions such as Rakan, Misfortune, and Echo. Overall, both items serve a similar purpose, it just depends on what champions and composition that you're playing. Alright, next up are two items to look out for specifically to 10.9. To start off at number 7, let's talk about Shroud of Stillness. Shroud of Stillness is an item you're often not going to see in most games unless it dropped from a PvE round or from a full item carousel. But don't let that prevent you from considering, as it may end up doing fairly well in 10.9 depending on how the meta forms. In particular, it's fantastic against clumped compositions, and with rebels looking to return to the meta, it's a super useful utility item to use against them. Try to give Shroud of Stillness to a flexible champion that you can move around, usually something in the front line or back line that doesn't require specific positioning. Make sure to scout each round and place it in a position that affects multiple important champions. Generally, those champions have highly useful abilities that you want to slow down how quickly they cast, such as Xerath, Lulu, Kale, or Aurelia. Another added bonus of the item is that it provides dodge chance, which currently has no item to counter it. The second item to look out for specifically in 10.9, coming in at number 6, is Last Whisper. Last Whisper is by no means a new item to consider, but it's never really been a high priority outside of a few very specific situations. But in 10.9, there's a good chance that a lot of compositions will be running armor-heavy frontlines or focusing on making Bramble Vest, and Last Whisper does quite well against all of that. The other reason why Last Whisper may be a good item to play in 10.9 is the prevalence of early Vanguard after the buffs to 2 Vanguard in 10.9. Due to that buff, which increased the armor of 2 Vanguard from 60 to 125, playing that trait early game as the front line is much more likely to happen. To counter the increased armor, you either need to play champions with good magic damage, or if you have an auto attack focused champion, you can look to make an early Last Whisper. From there, you can pivot into Aurelia or Jhin carry later in the game. Alright, let's continue down the list with the number 5 pick, Zephyr. As always, Zephyr is a solid utility item at all stages of the game, but in particular, it can be the key to victory late in the game. Being able to take a champion out of the round for 5 seconds can be absolutely devastating to a lot of compositions at any stage of the game. It can be countered by Quicksilver, but with Quicksilver receiving a nerf in 10.9, it's likely to be built less. Trapclaw will be built more, and Zephyr is not blocked by Trapclaw, which increases the value of the item in 10.9. Always be wary of players making a Zephyr, as you need to be diligent in scouting where they're placing it. You can easily lose a late game round due to another player's Zephyr. Make sure you always scout to find optimal positions for your Zephyr. Overall, this item is one of the few that can be easily made every single game and always provide usefulness. Since we mentioned both of these items, the number 4 spot goes to both Quicksilver and Trapclaw. These two items are jointly number 4 on the list because they serve a very similar purpose but in different ways. Quicksilver will be used to stop all CC for 10 seconds, while Trapclaw blocks 1 spell against the target. The value of both of these depends on the game and what composition you're running, but with the nerf to Quicksilver in 10.9, the value of Trapclaw has never been higher. With that said, it's still worth it to run Quicksilver for a few specific carries like Xerath, as you really want them to cast their ultimate and not be interrupted early on in the fight. Trapclaw is better suited for champions like Jhin that you want to prevent the spell damage from being done to them. Trapclaw is also valuable at blocking spells and stunning the caster, which can shut down certain champs like Misfortune or Kaisa. Whichever of these two items you do build, you'll also get the benefit of 20% dodge chance. With no current item or trait to counter dodge in the game, having 20% dodge chance on a champion is absurdly strong and can often win fights in the later stages of the game. We're now into our top 3 picks for items at 10.9. First up is Bramble Vest, coming in at number 3. Bramble Vest continues to be a solid item choice in 10.9 as it makes the champion you give it so much harder to kill. Most of the time it's going to be going on a frontline champion, but there's cases where placing it on a carry is worth it if there's champions like Aurelia in the game that are going to be getting into your backline. But outside of those specific scenarios, you're likely to be giving it to a frontliner, especially in the case of Mech Infiltrator, as it's a core item for the Super Mech. All in all, this item is great at all stages of the game, and with the most recent buffs to Vanguard, it's going to be a highly contested item to grab, as it makes any of those Vanguards much harder to kill while also providing decent damage. The meta is also still favoring Dark Stars and Cybernetics, which means you'll want this item to block some of the damage of Aurelia and Jhin. Next up is number 2 on the list, Deathcap. Deathcap has quietly always been a solid item throughout most of TFT. It provides so much extra damage with the AP bonus, and in set 3, that value has gone up tremendously as every champion can scale with ability power. So even if you do give it to, say, Leona, she's actually still going to get value out of it. With Rebels perhaps returning in the meta in 10.9, Deathcap is a worthwhile item to consider, as it's strong on a lot of late game champions such as Xerath, Misfortune, and Aurelian Soul. There's also still builds that use it, such as Space Pirates with Darius carry, and can even be a core item on Aurelia instead of Infinity Edge. Overall, this item can be flexed in a lot of different builds on a variety of champions. And the final item on our list, coming in at the number 1 spot, is Guardian Angel. It's likely no surprise that this item is number 1, as it continues to be one of the best items to make for a multitude of champions. It almost always gets value with their revive, especially for champions that have important ultimates that you need to have cast. The biggest downside of this item is how difficult it can be to procure both the sword and the chain vest, as often both are highly contested, so don't skip out on picking up those components if the opportunity presents itself. Much like Zephyr, this is another item that you can make every single game. Alright, that's going to be it for our top 10 list, but don't go anywhere just yet, because you know we're not done until we have our honorable mentions to go over. The theme of our honorable mentions today is going to be items that are built from the spatula. The first honorable mention goes to Demolitionist Charge. While Mech Infiltrator may be a bit weaker in 10.9, the value of Demolitionist Charge is still quite high, as it's still a core item for Kaisa and can be used in Rebels for gangplank. You can slap this bad boy onto either Aurelian Soul or Misfortune and have great results. Our next honorable mention is Infiltrator's Talons. The main use of this item is to give Infiltrator to Aurelia, but in 10.9, with 2 Infiltrator being buffed, it may be more just a versatile item to make. Look to put this item on a carry like Xerath or Kale and splash in a second Infiltrator, and bam, you have a free 50% attack speed buff. And now it will actually reset on takedown, so you'll continue to get that value from the trait throughout the entire entire fight. It may end up being niche, but there are ample ways to get creative with the item. And our last honorable mention is the Rebel Medal. It hasn't been fully explored yet whether rebels are a staple part of the meta, but it looks like they may be, and because of that, the value of this item goes up. Being able to turn Gangplank or Misfortune into a rebel opens up more possibilities for the build, and while it is very situational, it can end up being the reason you win a game. And that's going to be it for today's video, folks. We hope this helps you with your 10.9 ranked climb. Keep in mind that the items on this list are not the only viable items, as set 3 has a wide variety that can actually be played. Let us know in the comment section below what items have been working for you so far in 10.9. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.